I'm really feeling very emotional about this latest farm murder in South Africa, because I personally and intimately knew Annette Kennealy, who was a human rights activist in the domain of rural safety in South Africa. And I once spoke to her about organizing a civil defense camp for farmers right in this same spot. Where we were walking here in nature. She loved nature. She always went on hiking trails. She loved horses and dogs and other animals, wild animals too. But the problem we are having in South Africa, and that leads to this kind of murder, is that the murderers receive some form of military training when they go to attack civilians and civilian farmers in South Africa. And part of Annette's campaign and her job was to organize defense for these farmers and preparedness and to arm them as well against these kinds of attacks. And one of the astonishing things, of course, was that she herself was killed while she always had a firearm with her. She had a 9mm Astra pistol at her side all the time. But apparently the person who killed her, his name was Kenny Ramachimbila. He was an employee of hers living on the farm, and at some point he had turned against her, and then he clubbed her to death with an iron rod and and apparently a hammer. Now, in my view, an event like that must be triggered by outside influence, because why does an employee turn against his employer and kill him just like that? But we know that he belonged to the same tribe as our current president, who has just been elected, Mr. Cyril Ramaphosa. As you can see in their names, the Rama prefix is repeated, Ramachambila and Ramaphosa. And it could be that this position of power that the vendors have now assumed in South Africa, with one of them reigning over the whole country, that this triggered this very violent and sudden behavior, unexpected behavior from Annette's employee. Annette was a lovely person. She was very beautiful. She was well read. She once put me onto some books about evolution and human and animal behavior. She was also active in opposition politics in her hometown of Louis Trichardt, where she served as a town councillor for a few years, not so long ago. So what we are living through here in South Africa is really unprecedented in the world, because we are a minority that is not protected by our government, but is actively persecuted by them. There are assaults on our language, on our culture, and this kind of hostility and negative discourse against our farmers, who are actually producing food for 50 or 60 million people in South Africa. Now, there's another element to the story which may also have played a role. A few days before her death, Annette posted an article on the Vice.com website which claimed that there was a military delegation from Britain that visited South Africa in 2016 or shortly before that, and that studied the methods by which they could maintain our ANC regime in power in South Africa, which actually makes a mockery of democracy in South Africa, because if a foreign power is involved in keeping the one party in power, why do we then vote every 5 years? And it could be that outspokenness of Annette in that case, but also in other cases, led to her being targeted by some of the dark forces that are definitely operating in South Africa. And I really appeal to the Russian people who have historically been very sympathetic to us during the Anglo-Boer War, when the British put us into concentration camps, to listen to our plight and to, in some way or another, help us in facing these extremely violent conditions that pertain currently in South Africa.